Welcome to our August webinar focusing on flexible approvals in Sage 300, highlighting new features in Extended Workflow and Orchid Notes. Who needs Extended Workflow? We need the CFO to approve anything over $10,000. We had someone change a credit limit without permission. Our auditors want to see who approved what. General ledger batches for capital expenses need to be approved. We need 2 people to review before changing bank details for EFT transfers. We're growing and the owner can't be the bottleneck for approvals anymore. Management wants to approve in a browser or on their phone. Have you or your customers heard these questions or feedback in the last few months? At the end of the presentation, you will have a good understanding of the choices available to Sage 300 users to address these questions. And we will demonstrate examples fully embedded in Sage 300. Today, Anne and I will demonstrate approvals of Sage 300 records on the Sage web screens. And this is linked to the recent release of new features in Extender and Information Manager Notes. We will go through the new web screens in Extender Workflow, the ability to run Extender scripts in Notes on the web screens, new workflow conditions, and general improvements. So the new features will make the workflow available to Sage 300 web screen users, and these improvements came directly from feedback from users and partners who wanted workflow rules that are easier to configure and maintain, and an approval experience that fits the way people actually work. And today we will show you how it all fits together in practice, with demonstration of GL Journal batch approval, EFT Vendor approval, and OE sales order approval. Before we look at the examples, a quick refresher on Orchid modules and the Sage 300 web screens. New in this release, Extender Workflow Console and the detail log, workflow log on the web screens, and Extended Notes on the web screens being the ability to run a script in Orchid Notes. Notes and document management link have been available on the web screens for a few years now, and so have EFT processing for AP and AR, all the transaction screen are available on the web screens. A reminder that you do need a subscription license, a current subscription license, to run the web screens. Why would you use the web screens? It lets you use Sage 300 in any browser. It gives you the depth of features of the Sage 300 ERP application in a web interface. You can run it alongside the desktop screen, so you can have some users running on the web screen, some users on the desktop screens, depending on what they're doing, which gives you flexibility in how and when you work. Another brief refresher on Extender Workflow and Teamwork. There are detailed training videos on the Orchid website and in the help, but here are a few key points about Extender Workflow and Teamwork. It is embedded in Sage 300 using the Sage views and SDK. Extender Workflow applies to all batches such as AP invoice, AP payment, AR refund, AR invoices, AR receipts, GL batches, master file, customer, vendor, items, locations, and transactions such as IC adjustments, transfers, order entry transactions, OE orders, purchase orders. It includes extensive logging and is built around an easy configuration of your workflow rules. What is approved? How do you identify the records to approve, and who approves, with up to 5 consecutive approvers. So once you have designed your approval flowchart, and these days with AI, it's even easier to draw a nice flowchart for your business process. You just need to apply that to the workflow rules. And we'll show you how to do that today. Teamwork is a collaboration between Orchid and AutoSimply AC Chat that lets you approve workflow in a mobile app. Also lets you chat about Sage 300 record in the mobile app, and include expense claims and timesheet entries, as well as extensive logging of not just who approved what, but the reasoning and the conversations people had around that approval. Workflow rules is all around what, how, and who approves. If you haven't looked at Extended Workflow for a while, you might have struggled configuring the workflow templates. So we encourage you to have a closer look at the workflow rules that were introduced last year and the default templates, workflow templates that we are now including for a range of Sage 300 records. It's much easier to configure who approves what and how the different approval paths are configured based around the rules. And these improvements are all based on customer feedback. So we've now added the ability to build approval path based on any line in any entry in a batch, not just the first line, or any field in a detail aligned transaction. So your sales order, your purchase order. Previously, everything was based on the first line. Now you can include an item or an item description or GL account from any line in the record. And we've also added some new comparison, contains, starts with, and ends with in the workflow rule. And we will show in the demonstration how these enhancements support more realistic business scenarios. For example, when approving a GL batch here, is there a prepayment in that batch? Knowing that prepayment means any GL account that starts with 14. If no, only Steve approves. If yes, then Anne is the first approver and then Steve approves. And that would take any batch that has an entry, including an account starting with 14. Okay, a major new feature in this release is the Extended Workflow Console is now available on the web screen as well as the detail log. So web screen users can now use the Workflow Console to view all their approvals or all the pending approvals if they are if the security is configured that way, and they can then approve and reject directly from the Workflow Console. It is the same functionality as the workflow console on the desktop screens. You do need a workflow user license to use that screen, and you do need to run Extender on a subscription license to access the web screens. We're also now supporting dynamic content in Orchid Notes by running an Extender script in the web screen. Again, this is parity, same functionality as the desktop screens. And why would you use Extender scripts in a note? For conditional notes, so that users can see what they need. You can have dynamic content without switching screens. For example, year-to-date sales, stock on hand information, back orders, credit status when you're processing a sales order. To be able to drill down to other Sage screens without manual searching. And you can integrate to external data into Sage, for example, displaying freight charges or exchange rates. The latest product update also includes a range of other improvements to Extender, mainly based on customer feedback. The overall improved security create a more efficient and consistent experience for users and developers, which will reduce the risks in implementing customizations in Extender. So improved error handling when running pip in scripts, additional option to specify script path when you're using IIS or terminal server setup, and some UI improvements to the Extender module screen. This all applies to Sage 300 versions 2024, 25, and 26, and I'll encourage you to refer to the help for details. And in our first example, Anne is going to show us how to approve GL journal batches on the web screens.
Thanks, Natalie. What I'm going to demonstrate today is the ability to have your workflow rules scan all the journal details in a GL journal batch and define a rule based on any one of the journal detail rows. And during this demonstration, Approver 1, Anne, is going to review and approve the workflow instance using the web screens, the workflow console on the web screens. And User 2, Steve, is going to use Teamwork to approve on their mobile device. We will also have a look at the workflow logs on the web screens, as well as the communications recorded as part of Teamwork. Having a look at the configurable workflow rules in the Extender workflow rules screen for the GL journal batch approval, we can see that we have 3 rules applied. The first one says if any journal detail, the formatted account, is 3200, which is retained earnings in this database, then Anne is the first approver and Steve is the second approver. And we could have up to 5 approvers, either users or groups. And you can see in applying the rule, you could choose any field of the batch, the first journal header, any of the journal headers, the journal details, or any of the journal details, or you could just have the rule apply to all batches. But in our case, we're looking for any journal detail containing 3200. If none of the journal details contain 3200, then the second rule will apply. So all other GL batches need 1 approver, which is Anne. And the journal batches that need an approver is if the source ledger is GL. But for all other GL batches that come from the subledgers, i.e. the source ledger is not GL, then they get automatically approved because we're saying all records don't need an approver. And when we're creating a workflow instance, we are setting the color or grouping of these workflow instances to GL. So somebody working on the workflow console with a lot of instances can just filter by GL if they need to. So let's have a look at how this would work in practice. Susan receives an email asking her to do the auditor's adjustments. And she can see this one for $100,000 for the retained earnings and exchange gain or loss adjustment. And so Sue goes to enter this particular batch. And the first entry is for the adjustment need to be made for doubtful debts. And the second entry is the one for the retained earnings exchange gain or loss. And Sue is going to attach the auditor's requirements for later referencing by other people. And she's going to make this ready to post. And the ready to post request is what triggers the workflow. And because this batch contains an entry for retained earnings, the workflow is going to start and there's going to be 2 approvers and then Steve. And we can see that the teamwork chat has been started and it's waiting for approval by Anne, one of 2 approvers. And Anne receives the email that Susan has requested approval for the batch. It's batch number 255, and she is going to go ahead and have a look at that and approve if okay. So connecting to Sage 300 using the web screens and going to the workflow console. And see she's got lots of instances she needs to deal with, but can go ahead and choose to only look at those that she's assigned to a group she's in and filter by the GL color to have a look at just GL entries waiting for her. And here we see the batch 255 waiting for approval as signed by Sue. So she can drill down into the GL batch to check the entries. She also sees the chat that was created and has access to the auditor's letter that Sue attached when the batch was entered. And on entry 2, she can see the reason why the workflow has been included with 2 levels. because of the entry to retained earnings. So this is all okay from her point of view, so she's going to go ahead and approve this instance. And as the record will now be assigned to Steve, it will drop off her console. And Steve is using Teamwork using the Windows app, but could be using any mobile device and running the app on that device. And Steve sees that he has a message to approve batch 255. And when selected, he can see that Susan initially entered the batch and asked for approval. The workflow assigned to 2 users, first to Anne and then to Steve, because retained earnings was included in the second journal. And he sees that Anne has approved and has commented the documentation checks out okay. And now it's up to Steve to approve. So he's going to go ahead and make a comment. And is going to go ahead and approve. And the Teamwork chat is updated accordingly. And back in Sage 300, signed in as Sue, Sue sees the full history of the Teamwork chat, that it was assigned to Anne and approved after checking the documentation. Steve then gets the alert and approves based on Anne's recommendation. And you can see the second level approval posted the batch. So not only do we have the documentation in the AC chat as to what happened, we also have the workflow history. And we can see that Susan started the workflow and then approved, making the comment, the documentation checks out okay. And Steve approves, saying okay as per Anne's comment. So we have the full history of the chat, that it relates to the casual conversation around posting of the batch, as well as a full history of each step taken along the way with the workflow. So we have just seen a workflow being triggered by configurable rules. The condition is based on an entry in any journal, and we have seen how to use Extender Workflow Console on the web screens, as well as approving in the Teamwork mobile app. So we've seen 2 different experiences in approving workflow instances, one on the web screens and one in the mobile app via Teamwork. And we've seen the extensive logging, both the workflow logs and the Teamwork chat history, which can be displayed with the source transaction at any time. In this second scenario, we're going to have a look at approving EFT vendor details. Using EFT processing, you can have a separation of duties between users who enter EFT details and users who approve EFT details. And you cannot create EFT files for vendors or customers and employees if the details are not approved. But there are no notifications to the approvers of EFT details awaiting approval. There's no visibility of outstanding approvals. There's no audit trail of who approved what and when, and no way of having configurable rules for who approves which records. But if you add Extender, alerts, notifications, and workflow, Then your approvers can receive an email notification. Approvers will have a list of all their actionable items on the web screens or on the Sage desktop, with drill down to the relevant screens. Notifications like EFT vendor status can be automated and displayed on all relevant screens. A full audit trail of who approved what and when is kept. And you've got the ability to have configurable workflow rules, up to 5 levels of approvers or groups of users, and these approvers can either be in parallel or in series. And this is what we're going to have a look at now. Building on the separation of duties in EFT processing, we're going to add extender alerts and workflow for notifications and full approval process. The approver is going to receive an email notification when the change happens. The approver can then drill down from the extender web console to the EFT vendor screens to check the details entered and check against the documentation provided. And then we can also review the notes on the AP screens for the vendor status before and after the approval. And also we can see the audit trail of all the approvals done. Susan is logged in the web screens and she receives an email from Anne to create the EFT details for this new vendor, New Look Office Supplies. So she first goes to Accounts Payable to find the vendor number that's been assigned. And sees it's 1590. And we can see that the notes for this particular vendor, which has automatically been tagged by Extender, is saying that the EFT vendor details has not been set yet. So Sue will go across to EFT to enter those details. And copying and pasting from the email. You see it's the ANZ Bank. The BSB number is 012361. And the account number we'll copy across. And we can see that the status is entered. The status needs to be made active prior to an EFT record being created for this vendor. And the note is dynamically changed to show that the EFT details are not active as opposed to do not exist. And Susan can also save away the email message that she received with these details and attach it for document management link. And we can see that we now have this email message with the details attached. But Extender Workflow has been configured for new EFT vendors and amended the EFT vendor details. If the EFT vendor details are new or amended, then Anne needs to approve them all. You could have up to 5 users who need to approve the vendor. So first Anne, then Stephen, then Natalie, etc. Or this could be assigned to groups of users, so anyone in the group could approve. And we could have different rules for different EFT vendors. So perhaps if the country was Australia, then Anne needs to approve. If the country is Hong Kong, then Terence needs to approve. But in our case, Anne will be getting an email notification for all the EFT vendors that need approval. And Anne receives an email saying Susan requests the approval of the new EFT vendor details for vendor 1590. And it's waiting for Anne's approver, and there is only one approver. Logging into Sage 300 as Anne and filtering on the console to only see the EFT records, Anne sees this particular record, that it's a workflow notification for vendor 1590. It was entered by Susan and it's waiting for her to approve the EFT vendor details. From here, Anne can drill down to look at the AP vendor, the AP vendor activity, or the EFT vendor details. So we'll first look at the EFT vendor details. And Anne can see that the vendor status is not active. She has access to the documents that Susan attached at the time of creating these EFT vendor details and can use that to reference them and check them off. And she can see that the status is entered. But from the workflow console, if needs be, she can drill down into the AP vendor to see how that's been set up, as well as the vendor activity. But if she's happy with these details, she can go ahead and approve. On approval, the status on the EFT vendor will be set to active, and the note will be updated to show that the details are now active. And the workflow instance disappears off the console. So if we go back to EFT processing and have a look at that vendor record, we can still have access to the document that was attached by Susan, and we can see the vendor status is active, as we would if we went to see the AP vendor record, or if we looked at the AP payments or the AP invoices for vendor 1590, we'd see that the status was now active. And in the workflow detail log, we see that for the EFT workflow for new EFT vendors, first Susan entered the record and started the workflow, and then Anne approved the workflow. And if we look at the values, we can see Anne's comment was okay as per email. In summary, the advantages of using Extender for EFT vendor approvals: the approvers get a workflow console and they have drill down on both the web screens and desktop screens. So the approvers have a list of approvals pending. They don't just need to rely on emails being sent to them. They have a choice of how the notifications are received, either via email or a notification via their Teamwork app. There's more transparency as supporting information is available on both the EFT screens and AP screens at all times. There's a full audit trail of each step of the workflow, so when it was started, who started it, and who approved the steps along the way, with any comments that they make. And you have configurable workflow rules, so who gets to approve which EFT vendors changes, maybe based on country or any other field on the EFT vendor that might drive a different approver.
Thank you, Anne, for your insightful demonstration of approving General Ledger journal batches and changes to EFT vendor details using the workflow console on the Sage 300 web screens. In our final scenario, we will look at approving OE sales orders. For OE orders, when approval is required, the workflow puts the order on hold automatically. This is configured by enabling the approval on OE orders in Extender, and you just need to configure the business rules. In our scenario, the business rules to approve OE orders are based on the discount percent and the delivery zone that the order is in. And this is based on the UPS zone optional field. But before we delve into Sage 300 and the workflow rules, we'd like to share a practical tip that we've started using to help configure the workflow. We have been encouraging partners and customers to start workflow configuration with a clear flowchart of the decision points. And we have found that AI is very helpful for this. So you can ask your preferred AI app to draw the flowchart. This is what I did to get the flowchart that is on this slide. And then you can add your business rules into your AI, check the flowchart, adjust it, and turn it into rules that you can enter into the workflow rules in Extender. Let's take a look in Claude. I use Claude, but other LLM can do something similar, and I don't pretend to teach you how to use AI. It's just something that we found quite useful. We like how it checks the logic, asks confirmation questions before you start building the rules, and it does speed up the process. So you can start with very simple questions. I need to draw a flowchart for sales order approvals. Or you write the text, the rules that the customer has given you. So in our example here, we said if the order discount is greater than 20%, approval is required. If the orders are in the Orchid zone, they're approved by Steve. Orders in other zones are approved by Anne and Terence. That's our business rule. It draws us this flowchart, which starts with decision points. It does highlight the decision points very well. Is the discount greater or not than 20%? And if no, it's auto-approved. If yes, checking the order zone, and the approver is determined based on the order zone. He does like to ask us confirmation questions like here, if you're not in the order zone, do they both confirming that they both need to approve one after the other? But one thing that we found with Extender workflow rules is that while these flowcharts highlight the different decision points very clearly, to translate the flowchart into Extender workflow rules, you need one more step, because you need to group each decision point to end up with a list of distinct rules, starting with the most restrictive. So I can just ask my LLM to do this for me. And just saying, I need a list of distinct conditions in priority order. And there it comes. Now telling me that if the discount is greater than 20% and the zone is Orchid, approval from Steve. If the discount is greater than 20% and the zone is not Orchid, requires approval from both Anne and Terence. And if the discount is less than 20%, no approval is required. The order is auto-approved. So this is what we are now going to go and configure in Sage 300. Let's go and configure this in Extender Setup Workflow Rules. So this is not a full training session. There's another video where we explain how to import the module to enable OE approvals, OE orders approvals, but we've already done that. So now I'm going to look for my sales order approval workflow rules. So our first rule is if the discount is greater than, okay, I've changed it to 10%, and the UPS zone is Orchid, Steve approves. What does that mean in terms of Sage 300 fields? It means that the discount percentage on the order is greater than 10%, and the optional field, UPS zone, starts with OR. So this is our very specific Sage 300 configuration where we use optional fields to track the delivery zone. And under the who for the approver, we're saying Steve is now the approver. Our second rule is that if the discount is greater than 10%, but it's not the UPS zone, so we're still looking at the order discount percent. We have our friendly name here, our field name, friendly name greater than 10. There are two approvers, Terence and then Anne. And then explicitly saying that all other orders, so basically if the discount is less than 10%, there are no approvers. So the ha is all. Reminder that these rules are evaluated in sequence. So this one first, if it finds that the discount percentage is greater than 10 and the UPS zone starts with OR. But for other UPS zones, so white, blue, red, Sage, it applies this rule as long as the discount percent is greater than 10. and this is all the other ones. If you need to change, very easy to add an approver for here. I can easily add another user to this list if I need to. The configuration is still done in the Sage desktop screens, but once the configuration is done, the workflow will start whether you enter the orders on the desktop, on the web screens, or through other means that use the Sage 300 views. So let's start with an order on the web screen. I've selected my customer, Acme Plumbing, and you can notice here this tray. This is now the updated web tray. Information Manager notes that let you run an extender script. So if you're running both extender and notes, you can display information that is relevant to the users who are entering the transactions. In this case, we're saying as you're entering the order, you can view the credit status or you can run the aging as well. You can see how much is due. You may have pending orders. You can double click to go and view other orders, outstanding orders, or you can get more information about the outstanding transactions. For example, I can double click, see all the different invoices. Oh, there's quite an old one here. I can double click and drill through to the AR invoice on the web screen and investigate if need be. So let's go back to our order. We'll come back to this in the context of the approval as well. So this is a new feature in the August 26th release of Extender and Information Manager. Okay, so I've entered my order. Let's check what is the UPS zone here. Just move the information here back to the right. Oh, it's the blue zone, so it's not the Orchid zone. I'm expecting 3 approvers if there is a discount greater than 10%. I'm entering my discount, 15%. As I'm posting this transaction, the workflow will kick in. So you can see the order is on hold. It does have a comment, which is the reason we've entered on a workflow rule. Discount is greater than 10% and it's not the Orchid UPS zone, so Terence has to approve. Okay, let's look at the second order for customer 1520. Where is the UPS zone? Okay, this one is going to be an Orchid delivery. It's also going to have, let's say, 17% discount. So now I see this one, which is the Orchid UPS zone. Steve is marked as the approver. Because I'm an administrator, I have a right to view all the pending approvals for all the users, not just the ones that are assigned to me or a group I'm in. Typically, most users would see only the approvals that are pending, that are assigned to them or a group they're in. So the external workflow console on the web follows the same logic as the ones on the desktop screens. This is the one we've just done. 104 assigned to Terence. If I click on the values, I can see that there will be 3 approvers, Terence, then Anne and Susan, and that is the reason why this order is on hold. Now if we look at order 105 assigned to Steve, again I can check the values and see there will be only 1 approver, Steve, because we are in the Orchid UPS zone. Go to the bottom and I can see the UPS zone is ORC. If I want to see more detail, I can drill down and open the OE order. I have access to the same information that the user entering had access to, which is the credit status, our outstanding balance, our AR aging. I can double click to view the detail of this outstanding balance, and I can double click to go and open the AR transaction if I need to. Let's now look at it from the point of view of Steve, who is an approver. I'm going to look at the workflow console, and he's looking at orders or approvals assigned to him or a group I'm in. Let's just focus on the OE orders for now. And let's look at the one we've just entered. Okay, Steve can look at the values and see what's happened. The discount percent was 17. UPS zone is Orchid. Great. Can drill down either to the customer to see more information about the customer or to the OE order. And Steve has access to the same information that I had when I was entering the order. My credit status or my AR aging. Double click to view the outstanding invoices, change the shape of it if need be, and look at this one, which is the largest outstanding invoice, which is a bit old. I can drill through and open the invoice and look at any information that is relevant. Now, if we go back to the workflow console, Steve could reject, but for sake of the presentation, I'm going to approve the order. It came from the trade show, that's really good, so okay for the discount. So because there's only one approver for this order, it drops off the console, it's approved, and it's immediately taken off hold. We can go and have a look here in the workflow detail log. And you can see that for, make this a little bit bigger, order 105, it was now approved by Steve. I can filter just for order 105 to see exactly what happened. It was started by admin and then eventually approved by Steve. Click on the values to see the comment that Steve has entered. When I have multiple approvers, it will show that level 1 has approved, but I might have other approvers waiting for their turn to approve. Now, in this particular example, the other thing we have configured is a notification in Microsoft Teams when an order is approved. And in this example, we see that we have a notification in Microsoft Teams with a new order being created, name of the customer, the fact it's approved and released, and communication can happen in Teams about this order. So this is independent of Sage 300. This is pushing information outside of Sage 300 to the relevant stakeholders. And this is one more choice that you have when using Extender Workflow. In our OE orders approval example, using the Workflow console, we've demonstrated the new web Workflow console. We've also shown how you can have role-based visibility of your approvals. So some users can see only their pending approvals, others can see everything. We've looked at how to configure the rules and seen the flexibility of the conditions, the what that you can, the what and the how that you can set up, and how we can use LLM to help build those rules more easily. A new workflow rule included starts with, and that applies to field on the header, field on any line of the order. That is also a new feature. And optional field has been around for a long time. Those rules are easy for customers to maintain themselves. They can easily change the approvers and the conditions as well. You can have up to 5 sequential approvers, which can be individual Sage users or groups of Sage users if you want any user in a group to do the approval. We've looked at extended notes on the web screen, which helps provide relevant information to the approvers and to the users entering the transaction without having to click and open other screens. You have the information you need as you need to. So because you have this easy interface, you can complete your approvals more quickly. You have all the information in one screen, which will help reduce bottleneck and speed up the approvals. And the notifications can happen in the tools that users are familiar with, Microsoft Teams, emails, or if you want to save all the chat, all the discussion around the approval, use Teamwork in the app. In summary, we've looked at examples of flexible approvals in Sage 300, which are easy to use. You have a choice of device and you have full audit logs. Everything we've looked at is logged in Extender in the Sage 300 database. If you're using Teamwork, all the chats and comments are also all logged in the Sage 300 database. Great for auditors and for history. Ease of use, the approvers can choose the desktop, the web screens, or the mobile app. Everything is embedded in Sage 300 for many record types. Master files, like the EFT Vendor example we've looked at, batches like the GL batch example we looked at, or transaction files such as OE orders or purchase orders. And users can choose their own notification method, which means you have a very consistent setup for all types of records in Sage 300. Flexible and powerful configuration. If you haven't looked at extended workflow features for a while, we encourage you to try the new workflow rules. You just have to configure what, how, and who. You can configure your rules based on the header, any detail, optional field values. You can have sequential or parallel approvers by using groups. Much easier to configure and maintain than working directly with the workflow templates, which may be what you experienced before. So if you want to try the Extender Workflow Console on the web screens, you just need a subscription license for Extender and for the workflow users, because all the approvers, so anyone who's using the Workflow Console, needs to have a workflow user license. There are no special installation instructions. You just need to install the latest update of Extender. And if you already have Extender, you need to upgrade it. You can find all the details in the Extender release notes in the help. When we looked at the notes on the web screens, that requires the latest installation of Information Manager. And again, that also requires a subscription license. And the configuration to run the web screen for Notes and Document Management link is described in the help. You can contact us if you want some custom training sessions on Extender Workflow, Information Manager, or any other Orchid products for that matter. So you have access to resources on the Orchid website, and we are now available for Q&A.